This is Judaism Unbound, episode 491, Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness, episode 4, Shiru Ladonai. Sing right the fuck now. We are proud to introduce the third podcast in the Judaism Unbound family of podcasts, Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness, hosted by Jericho Vincent. We are the ancestors of the future. This new podcast offers a spiritual home for listeners seeking to connect Jewish ancestral feminist wisdom with their own svara, moral intuition. Each episode of this limited series delves into a different story of our ancestor Miriam, illuminating her mystical teachings and offering practical tools for navigating and flourishing in personal or political spiritual wildernesses. Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness charts a radical, fresh Jewish path for its listeners and the world. We're thrilled here at Judaism Unbound to periodically feature episodes of Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness here on our feed. But we don't only feature those episodes alone. Lex Rofeberg, that's me, and Rena Yehuda Newman, two members of Judaism Unbound's team, supplement each episode with some gemara, commentary, as well. We hope that our ideas will help spur you to form your own gemara, your own commentaries, and channel your unique teachings about this podcast and beyond into the world. Without further ado, here's Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness.
In the past couple of months, I've had a number of conversations with people where I ask how they're doing, and they say, well, it feels weird or inappropriate to say this with the world falling apart and all the horrors that are unfolding, but actually, I'm doing okay. My life is surprisingly good. It's hard to know what to do with happiness when we're in a spiritual wilderness. Are we supposed to stay solemn, stay angry, stay in grief all the time? What role does joy play when we're lost or overwhelmed or in crisis? Our survival guide Miriam had some sharp and clear advice on the subject that we'll talk about in this week's episode, along with tambourines, somatic experiencing, the mystical power and gender politics of a circle, bell hooks, and a practice for bringing Miriam's living Torah into our own lives. I'm Jericho Vincent, your local feminist, trans, Kabbalistic rabbi, and this is a survival guide for a spiritual wilderness. Let's continue on the path. In our previous episodes, we encountered the ancestor Miriam when she was a child, a strange and wise child with powerful wisdom for navigating this spiritual wilderness of slavery. Well, Miriam grows up. She's a slave, she's beloved by her people, and she becomes a leader. The kind of leader who is in the trenches with the people, who suffers as the people suffer. Then everything changes. A series of pandemics and ecological disasters hit the land, and Miriam, with her baby brother Moses, all grown up, and with the help of Goddess, lead the people out of slavery. Many, many thousands of them are on the run, heading out into the great unknown, tasting freedom after generations of abuse and suffering. After a couple days of traveling, the people arrive at a vast sea. Suddenly, they hear horses in the distance. It's their oppressors, their slave masters, coming after them, screaming for blood. The people are trapped between a rapidly approaching army and the water. It's all over. But then one brave person filled with spiritual chutzpah, Nachshon ben Aminadav, starts marching forward into the sea. Our stories say that a miracle happens, the sea splits, the people cross through, then their former slave masters jump in after them, but then the water comes crashing down and washes away the oppressors. The people teeter on the sand, safe on the shores of this new land, the wind knocked out of them. They've just been through another trauma. They've just landed in a new country, a wilderness that stretches in front of them as far as the eye can see. And they've just had their lives saved in an awe-inspiring miracle. As they're catching their breath, the leader Moses, the little boy in the basket all grown up, he starts to sing and he says, Ashir Ladonai, one day I'll sing about this. The mystics are puzzled. Why is Moses singing about singing in the future? So the mystics understand this to mean that subliminally, Moses is saying, one day in the future, when I'm really and truly safe, when I've processed this whole experience, when I feel secure, then I'll really celebrate that I was safe from death by the splitting of the sea. But then Miriam steps forward. She has a tambourine in her hand, and all the women follow her. And Miriam and the women, they start to dance in circles. Miriam chants a different song than her brother. Vatan lahem. The song she chants to the women and the men and the non-binary folks, all the people there, Miriam's song is not a Shiru Ladonai, one day I'll sing. Miriam's song is Shiru Ladonai, sing right the fuck now. I know we're scared about what we're facing. I know we've been through hell. I know this is a crisis, but this is a moment of joy. Our lives were saved. Don't wait to be happy. Seize and relish your happiness right now. This is the fourth part of our 5-part survival guide. Shiru Ladonai, sing right now. If you have a moment of joy, seize it. Joy is sacred. It's our responsibility to foster joy in a spiritual wilderness. Joy is fuel for survival. We have a lot of responsibilities here in the spiritual wilderness of this historical moment. I like to think about it like we each have 2 plots of land, a field of grief and a field of joy. They both need tending. How well have you been tending your field of joy lately? Tending our fields of joy, that's not a luxury, it's a sacred obligation. In the sacred text of the Talmud, there's a story about Rabbi Baroka, a 2nd century sage who's sitting in the marketplace in conversation with Elijah the prophet, an immortal spirit guide, who points to 2 brothers in the marketplace and says, these 2 brothers, they're definitely going to paradise in the afterlife. Rabbi Baroka wonders why, like what wonderful things have these brothers accomplished to be promised such a reward? Maybe they're great scholars or teachers or leaders. So he goes over to the brothers and asks them, what do you do? The brothers answer him, they say, we're comics. We cheer people up. This is how holy joy is. Creating and fostering joy is the route to paradise. Our joy it's not a betrayal of the grief or outrage that we might feel in a spiritual wilderness. Miriam tells us no, to the contrary. We need our joy alongside our grief and our outrage. We need every particle of joy we can find or create. As my student behavioral specialist, Dr. Marcy Beagle says,
Miriam models the way that joy is an essential ingredient for building our resiliency.
But how do you do this? There can be this feeling of whiplash when something nice happens in the middle of an unfolding catastrophe, and you want to lean into the joy, but the grief is so intense. Miriam teaches us how we do this Shiru Ladonai, sing right now. She models it. She gets up with her beloveds and she starts to dance. Movement. As my student urban ritualist Becca Goldstein says,
Miriam understood the power of somatic co-regulation. Through embodied dance and song with her community, she invited a transmutation of the energy and catalyzed an opening into the next level of collective experience.
2,000 years later, Peter Levine developed somatic experiencing, teaching people how animals shake off trauma by literally shaking their butts. But Miriam knew this way back when. She's telling us this is how you transition from fear and sadness to joy. This is how you make space for the full range of your emotions. This is how you make sure you don't miss out on any experience of happiness while it's happening. The mystics love the brilliance of Miriam's attitude towards happiness, and buried in the patriarchal Kabbalistic texts you can find a bonanza of teachings celebrating the power and the wisdom of Miriam's Shir Adonai, Sing Right Now. The Zohar, the central Kabbalistic text, tells us that Miriam's singing is such a defining moment that 3 times a day, every single day in the spirit world, Miriam and Moses' mother, Yocheved, sings Miriam's songs, and the angels sing along with her. The 19th century Kabbalistic giant, the Me'or V'Shemesh, loves that Miriam dances in circles. You might not have known that Jewish circle dancing, like the Hora, it's not just a European folk tradition. It goes way back, all the way back to this moment with Miriam. And our circle dances are heavy with power and radiant with meaning. The Me'or V'Shemesh explains that the circle is the ultimate power system, one in which each person has equal access to the center. It's non-hierarchical. He explains that in Kabbalistic cosmology, the universe was created in the middle of a circle of potential, and in the future, when liberatory consciousness has spread, that Mashiach site we talked about in episode 1, righteous people will dance in a circle around the divine, pointing at the divine, saying, "Yes, this is what I had faith in." All will grasp the truth equally. So the world comes into being with a creative circle, and the world is moving towards a revelatory circle. And Miriam, the Me'or V'Shemesh explains, had access to this highest truth. That's what she was conjuring in her circle. Circles are places of creativity, revelation, conjuring, and truth. And what's more, the Me'or V'Shemesh undercuts the hierarchy of patriarchy, where men believe they're higher or better than women. And he explains that Miriam understood the very deepest truth that explodes the binary, explodes the patriarchy. He says, "Lamshich al yadei hakafos es haor ha'elyon asher ein sham bechinas tachar nukeva." Miriam, she drew down through her circles the highest, most sacred light in which there is no distinction between male and female. I really love that Miriam uses this deep knowing of her own equal and full power as a woman to create safety for the men who were too dysregulated to be fully present. Remember, she sings lahem to the men also. Come, dance with us, sing right now. We'll help you be safe. Gender trauma has been present in just about every major spiritual wilderness since we left the Garden of Eden, and it's certainly front and center in the spiritual wilderness we're in right now. I see in this mystical teaching and in Miriam's actions an invitation for women and non-binary folks to stretch into their own power and to notice the ways that this patriarchal wilderness has damaged men. As the great theorist Bell Hooks taught, patriarchy is the single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit in our nation. Yeah, men drive patriarchy, they use it to hurt women and non-binary folks, but they're also caught in a system of oppression much older than themselves, oppression that's harmed them too. How can women and non-binary folks use our power to invite men into the safety of surrender, into the safety of the circle, into the safety of power relations where we put truth, and not men, truth in the center? It's a big project, a communal project, and it's never been more ripe than it is at this moment. Speaking of community, another thing we want to notice about Miriam's Shir Ladonai, Sing Right Now, when her brother, shook from his near-death experience, sings, he sings Ashira Ladonai One day, I'll sing about this. When Miriam chants, Shiru Adonai, sing right now, the Hebrew is in the plural. Shiru, we are going to sing. Miriam understands that when you're in a spiritual wilderness, the waves of feeling that come at you they're just too big to digest on your own. You have to find your people and be with your people, digest with your people. That's how we stay afloat. Another lesson from Miriam's actions comes from the Al-Sheikh, a 16th century teacher, who points out that Miriam had a tambourine. She took a tambourine with her out of slavery, made sure to pack that as she fled, because she knew that music facilitates prophecy. This song of Miriam's, Shiru Adonai, sing right now, was a prophetic song, a song that was rich with divine power. So too, we need to carry our tambourines with us, have music at the ready to enable us to open portals of spiritual power whenever we stumble into a moment of happiness. So make your Shiru Adonai Spotify playlist, know your songs, reach for music to help you access the deepest power of your joy. Here's a snippet from my Shiru Adonai playlist. That was Ain't Nobody by Shaka Khan. If you want to see my whole Shiru Adonai playlist, it'll be in the show notes. Kabbalists use this mystical technique called Roshei Tevis, where they look at the first letters of words in a phrase or some other sequence in a sacred text, and they find meaning in what those first letters spell out. Reb Nachman of Breslov points out that if you look at the phrase, Vatan lahem Miriam Shiru Adonai, Miriam chants to the people, sing right now to Goddess. The first letters of these words, the Roshei Tevis, make up the word shalom. Reb Nachman says this is a gesture towards the truth that through Miriam's powerful song, the people found peace. Making space for joy alongside our own grief is key for our own peace when we're trying to move through a spiritual wilderness. One of my students asked me, okay, but how do I allow myself to feel joy when my joy has been taken away from me in the past? I wonder if that resonates with you, consciously or subconsciously, an anxiety or an unwillingness to feel happiness because we're afraid of losing it. It's a legitimate concern and makes sense as a response to a history of being hurt. My answer is this: we don't own happiness. Happiness is something that moves through us, that we get to enjoy while it's there, and the more open we are to it, the more we're able to be transformed by it. And then when it passes through us, we're able to give it to the earth. Whatever happens after, that happiness is like the rain. You're nourished by it long after it's gone. My husband and I, Ben Ash, got married on November 11th, 2016. We had a couple fall dates to choose from, and I was partial to the palindromic date for our future anniversaries, 11/11. Our wedding was in San Diego, where my father-in-law lives. We were scheduled to fly out of New York on November 9th, and I remember so vividly my daughter, who was then 5 years old, climbing into my bed early in the morning on that travel day. It was still dark outside. I held her in my chest and I said, "Honey, I have bad news." I put my hand on the top of her head, my palm pressed against her skull, as if I had the power to protect the fragile organ beneath the bone. I said to my daughter, "Hillary Clinton did not win." At the airport, the smug, hate-filled face filled the television screens that were hanging from the ceilings. I said to my daughter, let's look out the window at the planes. But she wouldn't look away from the TV. She was only 5, but she was a sensitive kid, picking up on every emotional current that moved through our house. We had told her about this unpleasant man. She didn't know a lot, but enough. And as we flew across the country, composed of so many people who had decided to put him in power, my daughter saw me crying, and she understood, at least on some level, why. We felt shell-shocked. It seemed bizarre to go ahead with our wedding to celebrate the miracle of our love in the aftermath of this disaster. On the day of the wedding, we went over to the venue and changed there. I felt excited, but also uncomfortable, the grief and shock of the election still echoing in my bones. Ben and I met in the courtyard along with my daughter for photos and to make some last-minute preparations. As we were fussing around with setup, I noticed my daughter had slipped away. She was over on the dance floor, her gold shoes kicked off to the side. She slid across the floor in her tights, her eyes closed, spinning and leaping in her white wool dress, her joyous face as radiant as a mystic's. All joy in that moment. She was Miriam, calling out with her dancing body, Shiru Ladunai. Yes, we've been afraid, but now we open to the joy and dance. It shifted everything for us. We put down our fear, our anxiety, and we flowed through that wedding, relishing and savoring every ounce of happiness it contained. It was such a gift to have seized that island of joy amidst a very difficult time. Let's take a moment to practice some of Miriam's Shiru Ladunai, Sing Right Now, together. You'll need a little space. When you're ready, take a moment in quiet contemplation to locate a seed of joy in your life. It can be something large, or it can be something very small. Then notice how much grief you're carrying right now. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. Get up on your feet in body or spirit and start to move. Start to shake the grief away a little. You're building a little pocket of space around you with the movements of your body. You're saying, I see you, grief. I feel you in my body. I release you for the next little bit. I return to the solid truth of my body. And then, when you're ready, begin to dance. Bonus points if you can do this with other people or animals. Dance the joy in your life. Hold in your mind the thing that is bringing you happiness and dance it out. Dance it in and through the grief. Imagine that with your body, you're weaving indigo Miriam energy, the loving, healing, sustaining energy of the ancestor Miriam in your space, into your body, into the world. Feel Miriam dancing with you, laughing with you, celebrating the precious joy with you. Indigo Miriam energy tumbling from her body, surrounding you with joy. use your arms to gather all of the indigo Miriam energy from all around you into a small condensed seed. In our first episode, we planted Miriam energy in our belly. In the next episode, we allowed that seed to grow roots to stabilize us. And in the last episode, we felt the seed sprout what became a trunk of supple strength that moved up our spine. Now plant the Miriam energy of your dance with your right hand, hand of compassion, palm down on your belly. Left hand, hand of strength, palm down on top. Feel that Miriam energy feed the seed within. Flow down to your roots, up your trunk, and then sprout branches of joy, reaching out to the world through your shoulders, your face, the crown of your head. Imagine your body is that tree, and feel the rain fall on you. Feel curiosity and delight wash over your head, stream down your neck, down your spine, through your seat and your legs, and then into the earth. I want to pray for us in this moment. I pray, Mora Miriam, Ancestor Miriam, thank you for the reminder of the value of joy, even in the most difficult of times. Call to us today and in the days ahead. Remind us, Shiru Ladonai. There is reason to sing right now. There is power to sing right now, to laugh, to goof off, to dance with friends, to celebrate the moment, because every moment is precious. May you guide us as we build a world of so much more joy for everyone. Next episode is the very last episode in this limited series. We'll encounter the famous Well of Miriam and learn how it can sustain us day to day on our journeys through the spiritual wilderness. I'm Rabbi Jericho Vincent, and I'm so excited to take this trip with you, guided by the ancestor Mora Miriam. This is a survival guide for a spiritual wilderness. I'll see you on the path.
Walk with me together through this wild and stormy land. Walk with me, my friend, together. Reach out and take my hand. Open up your eyes to the sunlight. Open up your heart to the sun. Listen to the drum beat so steady. Together we can overcome. Take my hand, and together we will walk down this winding road. Look around, and together we won't fear what we don't know. Open up your eyes to the sunlight. Open up your heart to the sun. Listen to the drum beat so steady. Together we will overcome. Walk with me together as we cross this beautiful land. Walk with me, my friend, together, all of us, hand in hand.
Thanks to Ella Joy Meir for the beautiful original music, to Becca Goldstein and Dr. Marcy Beagle, to the Confe Edges group, to my creative partner Ben Blum, to Maura Miriam for her guidance, and to Ruach HaOlam, the oneness within, between, and beyond us all. Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness is a part of the Judaism Unbound family of podcasts made possible with support from Littman Camphor Foundation for Living Torah.
Thank you, Jericho Vincent, for another incredible episode of Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness. I'm Lex Rofeberg.
And I'm Rena Yehuda Newman.
And we're back for our custom, which is to listen to each episode of Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness. And then here on Judaism Unbound's feed, a little while later, we release some commentary on it. So at this point, Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness has wrapped its own iteration, but we are still going strong and listening to it on our end. And we hope that for those of you who listened all the way through Survival Guide already, that this is a nice chance to sort of synthesize your thoughts and revisit. For those of you who haven't listened at all, we hope that this is like a good push in the direction of maybe I should go and listen to this great podcast, Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness. And there's one more Gemara on episode 5 that will be coming after this. So thank you so much for coming along with us. And as always, we hope you will generate your own commentaries, your own Gemaras on Jericho's amazing Mishnahs, on Jericho's amazing original material. So this episode, I have loved so many of the titles that Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness goes with. This one is pretty spicy. It's Shiru Ladunai. That's not the spicy part. It's translated as Sing Right the Fuck Now. And yes, I did say that actual 4-letter word. We get to slap the explicit label on this episode, makes it much more alluring to listeners. But I love that title because it shined a light on an element of the Exodus story that I hadn't thought about much, despite having, read it and experienced it at Passover a lot of times. This moment in Exodus 15, the famous chapter when we cross the sea, and I'm using we here, I mean it to all of us listening, whatever your identity. When talking about this story, I tend to enter we voice because that's what we do on Passover. But we cross the sea, and the reason that Jericho translated this as sing right the fuck now is both to recognize that there is a need to mark joy, maybe through song in this case, but in some way, even in the midst of terrifying reality, like Egyptians chasing you and just having drowned in the wilderness. And it also points to a textual thing that Jericho laid out beautifully of the difference between Moses at the beginning of the chapter 15, saying, I will sing at some future moment, versus Miriam sort of responding. It's not quite a response in the text, but Jericho frames it as a response, a correction, and I love that, of, no, we got to sing right now. We can't wait. And so I'd love to hear from you, Rena Yehuda. What jumped out to you about this episode, about finding joy in dark moments, about not necessarily waiting till some future moment where we can better process that joy?
I'm going to also emphasize the fuck in Sing Right the Fuck Now, and the importance of the urgency of that feeling. It reminds me of benching Gomel, or saying the blessing after one has survived or gotten to the other side of some really major life experience or otherwise actually dangerous situation, and how important it is to just set everything aside and say, oh my God, thank God I made it. Or, oh my God, this part of the bad thing is over, and what a joy it is to get to experience that relief, or get to experience that joy. And sometimes, as I think Jericho is pointing out in this episode, sometimes you're still actually inside of the bad thing. You've just reached kind of a new shore to it. And it's so critical that we acknowledge every single moment of transition inside of a transformative or really difficult struggle. And even though Klal Yisrael, even though the Jewish people are out of Mitzrayim, they're out of Egypt, and they've crossed over the sea, now they are Bamidbar. Now they're just in the wilderness, which is going to be a whole new set of struggles and challenges, which are also very scary and perhaps even filled with grief. I also want to point out the acknowledgement of grief as a part of the experience of coming out of a difficult situation feels important, because This episode isn't just about struggle. It's specifically about the way that grief and joy interact or sometimes feel like opposite emotions, when in fact, as Jericho says, you have to tend a garden of grief and a garden of joy. And even though they may be separate, they're actually happening concurrently. And I think about Klal Yisrael, I think about the Jewish people after they've come out of Egypt and the kind of grief that they might feel in that moment, even having gotten to the other side. Because sometimes it's actually only when you're outside of a really bad situation that you look back and you're like, oh my God, the thing that I lived through was horrible. There's a sense of grief about all of the things that you lost by nature of having gone through that experience, and not just the things that it took away from you, about lost time, about maybe the person that you had to be in that situation that you wished that you didn't, or all of the concessions that you made. Sometimes when you're inside of a difficult situation, you can't acknowledge those things because you have to keep it together in order to just keep going. What the Torah of Miriam here suggests that you need to sing right the fuck now is actually like, we're going to set everything aside in order to do an acknowledgement, to open up that space that we can feel the fullness of having finished a difficult experience and allowing some of that grief actually to rise up or to find its place. And that the only way really to do that actually is through joy. Because only in those contrasts actually do we get the full range of experiences that we feel as human beings who have gone through struggle.
I'm making maybe a weird connection, maybe not. I think it's possible the text actually wants us to notice this, but, who knows? Miriam, and I think we've spoken about this, is a waterbender. Like, I don't mean that in the literal Avatar sense, but like if Miriam were one of the four elements, water, earth, air, fire, clearly she's connected to water. And the connection I'm making is in our previous Gemaras, when we're looking at Miriam as a young child watching Moses in the basket being scooped up at the palace by Pharaoh's daughter and maidservants, there's a fear there. We talked about this in our most recent one. It's actually a terrifying situation. And part of me wants to read this as like Miriam's own growth story. Like Miriam, maybe the first time she was on the shores of a certain body of water, which is to say the river that Moses is pulled out of, the Nile. The first time she was probably in a space of deep anxiety and terror because like, oh my gosh, my brother is being scooped up by not only strangers, but powerful strangers who right now are in the midst of killing baby boys of this baby's background. Are they about to do that to him? And my guess is in that moment, and the text doesn't give us anything that would prove this wrong, is that she did not play any music or celebrate. And part of me wants to read this as, she actually learned from that first experience when she was predisposed towards thinking things may not end up okay, that there could be value in erring on the side of joy. And I don't know, I don't actually think that upon crossing the sea, everybody's only thought was, this is great and happy and we're chill now. Jericho hints at this, like there's desert as far as the eye can see. There's no reason to believe that life is about to be hunky-dory for a while. I don't think that the people were naive. I don't think they thought everything was going to be fine, and that's why they sang. I think they understood that they were transitioning from one really catastrophically bad time period to another that's going to be really, really hard, but a little less hard. The ability to have autonomy as a people is a big deal. And it is worth marking that joy, even and especially when there still is the catastrophe ahead. When there still is, the story of wandering in the desert, like there's a bunch of plagues that kill thousands of people due to the Israelites' own actions. There's all sorts of meanderings that happen in that wandering. And that doesn't retrospectively make this rejoicing song like silly. I still think it was worthwhile.
And Lex, you've just said that it's gone from a struggle that was really bad to something that's maybe slightly less bad. I'm like, they're just different, right? They're just like and frankly, maybe like even insofar as can you compare these different states? I'm not sure you can, but we move from one state of struggle to another, and the only constant in life is change. This notion that we actually have to mark those moments of change by having joy feels really significant, because I think you're exactly right. The Israelites didn't get to the other side and were immediately happy. They were like, oh no, now we have this new problem. They didn't actually really even want to leave Egypt. There are so many, built into the text of the story, you have Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, oh, we're not leaving Egypt. I just want to take the Israelites on like a 3-day holiday. Just like a few days.
Which he's lying.
Right. Of course he's lying, but he's also lying to the Israelites. And I think that's also kind of a crucial detail of like the Israelites on some level need to believe that they're just gone for a little bit, right? It's like baby steps, like, oh, we're just going to give you a taste of freedom, right? We're not leaving for good. You're not having to leave your entire life behind from the only thing that you've ever known in a situation where you had all of your needs met, but were also violently enslaved. This is only a short break, right? He kind of has to pull the wool over their eyes on some level, even to get them to be motivated to do that. And that's an acknowledgement of how absolutely difficult it is to move from one state of struggle to another.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that maybe I was being overly generous with like, it's just a little better. Maybe it's just differently bad. Yeah, that's super fair. And I want to dwell in some of the nitty gritty, like grammatical points that Jericho made, because they're onto something. And I know they're drawing on some commentators, but I'm very grateful to Jericho bringing out those commentators in our time, even if they generated these ideas earlier. This situation in Exodus 15, I know I mentioned that chapter before. The reason I can just like know it top of mind is that Exodus 15, this chapter of the Song of the Sea, is like a really notable moment in the Bible. This song of the sea, so it starts with a little preamble, and then we get this long song. We don't often talk about the content of the song. It's like really violent and terrible, and it's like, yay, they all drowned and their horses are dead, and like, but it's like really, really intense. We tend more to talk about the fact that there is a song than the content of the song. But the other reason I can know it pretty quickly off the top of my head is that it's one of the oldest texts, according to biblical scholars, in the whole Bible. There's evidence that the Hebrew of it is fairly archaic and probably predates the vast majority of the Hebrew Bible. So it's a cool chapter. And it also, when you look at a Torah scroll, you can see visually that it's different. It's organized in this way to sort of help you see, even from afar, that it is a song. It's not just like line, like most of the Torah. It's built to look almost like a sea that's being parted and you're crossing it. The specific nitty-gritty things. So there's a lot of evidence that this song was initially tied much more to Miriam than to Moses. And we know that because historically, the ancient groups of people that are relating to drums in various ways, both Israelites and otherwise, seem to consistently tie drum playing to women. What likely happened, and Rachel Adler has written about this and some others, is that this song was a song of Miriam, much more than it was a song of Moses, but then the folks putting together these 5 books of Moses wanted it in Moses's voice. They wanted him to be kind of the first speaker. It's a very patriarchal move, in a literal, like, patriarchal, like placing it in the mouth of a man, of Moses, which, as one could expect if you've listened to our podcast before, we're not huge fans of that maneuver. I do think that what happens potentially as a result is you get this awkwardness where at the beginning of the chapter, Moses is invoked, but at the end of the chapter, Miriam is invoked, and you get this interplay between them, which is actually, it allows us to find more meaning in it. And that's where this Ashira, I will sing, future tense, versus Shiru, sing right now, right the fuck now, comes up. Miriam's, which probably came first, in terms of chronologically which version of the song came first, is the idea that we sing right the heck now. And Moses's is when things are more stable, I will sing. It doesn't say that in the text, but I do think that there's an implication that not quite yet. I really agree with Jericho that there's a danger in constantly believing that around the next bend is when the moment of celebration is, that the good parts of life are coming soon and not in the right now, and that we benefit from finding, okay, this is a moment of joy. Maybe it's not a pure 100% joy, but we're going to celebrate. I mean, I'm thinking about this right now because we're in a moment of absolute catastrophe, of entire peoples being decimated, of groups of people being marginalized on purpose. And we still have birthdays. We still have holidays. I've had so many conversations with people that are like, how do we do that? I do think it's worth doing that. And not only worth doing that, but like unbelievably central to the endeavor of human existence, that we do that.
I've thought about this a lot, especially considering I got married 5 days before Trump's inauguration to my husband, who is also a transsexual, who also lives on the other side of the world. And I've been in a transatlantic relationship since we began, and there was a real
Transatlantic.
Transgender, transatlantic romance. Yeah, that's what we like to call it. I remember, in deciding to get married then, and this was our legal marriage, and we have not yet had a wedding. We intend, God willing, at some point to have a wedding there and a wedding here. But there was a real question for us about whether or not or how we could celebrate. And because this was not the timeline that I think I would have wanted to do this on, although we're very in love and this is 100% the right decision for us, I had a lot of questions about if I even feel like I want to celebrate this moment because of how much this had to happen under duress and because of circumstances that were so much larger than us. And this has been a reality for queer people, especially as pertains marriage and unions forever, right? We've always had to use this one potential protection of the state in ways that are not the way that straight people get to do it, which is always on their own timeline and always protected by the state, because that's the institution that the United States of America and many other states want to reproduce. And so many queer people throughout time, including queer people who have gotten into at least straight appearing relationships, have done it actually as ways of protecting themselves and others in a strategic move rather than something that is simply just because of love. And so I enter into that tradition as a trans person who is marrying another trans person at a time of extreme political duress. And I really struggled with the question about, was I even going to tell people that I had gotten legally married to this person who I adore? Did I want to announce it? Were people going to be mad at me actually for not inviting them to something that actually, there was a tremendous amount of ambivalence at the experience of that and a sadness that I felt on the day of it, despite the joy that really should have otherwise been mine. I want to go back into parts of Jericho's podcast here about what are the reasons why people might be precluded from feeling joy. They cite somebody else in the podcast who says, well, I'm afraid of that joy being taken away. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure that that's the reason why I had a difficult time feeling the joy. There are other reasons why we might want to repress joy, or why we might say, I'm not sure that I want to have that experience, or I even feel like celebrating because I'm actually angry about the circumstances that are afflicting me, or I haven't been able to work through the grief and it feels like there's no future in sight. And so I don't know how to access that joy. But I want to bring in a source about this question that actually the rabbis have been debating about for 2,000 years, which is directly relevant to this question of when do we celebrate and how do we celebrate when the world is on fire and we're experiencing a tremendous amount of dislocation and grief. There is this text that's at the end of Mishnah Sota, where the rabbis are having this argument about what happens when the world is falling apart. And what are the ways in which we can celebrate or not celebrate while that's happening? Because the temple has just been destroyed, and you have all of these sages who are dying and also being murdered by the Romans. They end up kind of having this internal argument that's like cited in these two sources about what can happen during weddings. And when I first read this Mishnah recently, it really was one of these situations where it felt like it was speaking directly towards me. Here's the Mishnah. During the war with Vespasian, the rabbis decreed against the use of crowns worn by bridegrooms and against the use of the bell. During the war with Quietus, they decreed against the use of crowns worn by brides, and that no one should teach their child Greek. During the final war, they decreed that a bride should not go out in a palanquin inside the city. But our rabbis decreed that a bride may go out in a palanquin inside the city. This is a list of different observances that were things that they did to deal with their grief, saying that things are so bad that like we shouldn't wear these crowns anymore, or things are so bad that you need to stop teaching your children Greek or being involved in the studies of the non-Jewish world, that because that's a thing that actually brings us joy and maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. But this last part is really interesting to me about during the final war, a bride should not go out in a palanquin. Then you have this second part that says, but our rabbis, who are those rabbis? I'm not sure. Like, we're not sure who the different warring factions are, but the sense is that at a time of dislocation and disruption, we're not actually sure who the authorities are. So there's two camps of rabbis, at least. And one of them is saying, you shouldn't ride around in your litter. You shouldn't do this big celebratory thing. That's too much. It's not appropriate.
Which, just to define it, like, I didn't know the word palanquin. It's like riding around in a special celebratory chair almost.
I mean,
right?
It's like what we do at, a bee mitzvah, right? We get the person in the chair and we bop them around. And I think this was like a palanquin is like a more extravagant version of that. But you have this other camp of rabbis that are saying, no. It's really important that we keep doing that. And I read this for the first time and I was completely arrested by it because I don't know, Lex, I don't know about you, but if you've ever had the experience where you're just reading a piece of Talmud or you're reading a really ancient text and it actually feels like it's directly speaking to your experience, super specifically, I was like, whoa, I myself have been debating about whether or not I should ride around in the fabulous chair after getting married at a time that the world is on fire. And here are the rabbis struggling with the same question 2,000 years ago. And the Torah of Miriam says, yes, absolutely, we should celebrate.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I love the Mishnah connection. What's interesting is in that Mishnah, it actually talks about drums, right? Like we're talking about the drums, timbrels, tambourines, like Miriam, after crossing the sea and all those with her playing these drums. And then in the Mishnah, a very different time period. And again, this is such an old song that it's likely we're talking about 1,000 years of distance, at least, between the text of the song in the Bible and the text of the Mishnah. And what's consistent about those is drumming is a clear signifier of joy. And that's still consistent today. We even know that, like, in periods of grieving in the Jewish calendar, the issue isn't singing. Like there are prohibitions around, like, certain kinds of music. The issue is not with singing. Like, a lot of us love sing. I love singing, and singing brings me joy. But much more than singing brings me joy, singing in concert, pun intended, with instrumental music brings me joy. And the drums are kind of the first layer of that. They're the heartbeat of bringing instruments to something. While we're on weddings, like, breaking the glass, usually breaking the glass is understood as connecting to something in the past. For some people, it's connecting to, even on a day of joy, we remember the devastation that was the destruction of the temple. That's sort of the classic reason one might break the glass. I don't think that's historically where it came from, but that is a reason that is often given. There's other reasons given for why one breaks a glass at a wedding. They tend to tie to the past. I think that it could really benefit us to understand that moment right now as a statement of, look, the world is on fire right now. This is not a moment of pure, unbridled happiness. This is a moment where we're loving one another. We're here for one another. We're celebrating our two folks who are getting married. We're about to lift them up on chairs, do all those things. And we're not blind to the world. Too often people want to pose these emotions as binary. That's why we feel like it's bad to feel joy right now. We don't think it's bad to feel joy right now. We think it's bad implicitly in our hearts to deny the tragedy of our world. What we then conflate is denying tragedy with experiencing any joy. That's a very binaristic setup, that if you're marking tragedy, you can't also mark joy. And I think that if we recognize that that moment of breaking the glass is kind of ritually naming that right now in our world there is absolute horror underway, it might allow us to better experience those rituals and have them achieve the actual functions they have, which are not to erase the realities of the world. We're not supposed to, like, it's not just like a sanctuary from the world to experience these things. Weddings are political. Like, they are actually tied to state apparatuses today. Like these are not, so like most couples go and sign a license.
Or when you've done it the way that I have, you sign a marriage license and you actually don't have a wedding because it is actually entirely about your status with the state.
Yeah. And so for a lot, I think a lot of people feel anxiety around celebrating anything at all because it feels like that in and of itself denies that people are being marginalized, are being killed, are being mistreated all around the world. We need to actively understand that it's not the way so that our rituals don't fall into the just, oh, we're in La La Land, we're happy today.
So much about Jewish conceptions of joy are interwoven with Jewish conceptions of grief, right? The fact that in our most joyous moments, we acknowledge a grief and a destruction, and that even in our holidays that we observe intense and immense grief, we have a sense that there is some kind of redemption or teshuvah or joy that is possible. When we're thinking about what are the structures in place that make it such a binaristic conception of either joy or grief, I think a lot of that is very authoritarian in nature. Authoritarianism wants there to be only one thing, and that's at the cost of the annihilation of everything else. But a Jewish idea of unity is actually unity through multiplicity, that it's actually because we are all separate and we are all different and we are all unique that we're able to resonate in the oneness of Hashem or in the interconnectedness of all things. So an authoritarian way of thinking about emotions, it only wants you to feel happiness when you're allowed to feel happiness, and it only wants you to feel sadness when it is in service of the state. It doesn't want these things to mix, because in that mix is an ambivalence that creates complexity and allows us to process in ways that help us know who we are and how we feel. And again, an authoritarian structure only wants there to be one idea. Fascism thrives on telling the same very violent and very boring story again and again and again. And part of what moments of joy do, and I think humor is a part of joy, right? Jericho told this story about the jesters, about the comedians. Part of what humor and satire do in the face of authoritarianism is it actually takes away their power. So much of fascism is really based on a story that the fascists are serious and in charge and should be taken seriously, as though this is a true fact that they deserve to be there and they should be there, and that's the truth of how things are now. Humor and satire at a time of authoritarianism play a crucial role in helping people question that reality through humor and through laughter and through laughing at things that actually deserve to be laughed at. Because how dare you think that you can do this kind of violence to other human beings? How dare you believe something so absurd that you are allowed to destroy lives, that you are allowed to be in control of other people in this way, that you are allowed to damage God's world? How dare you? And what's the best way to cut through the noise, to question that deeply held belief that authoritarianism wants us to hold, is by getting them to laugh at a joke. And that's why humor is so important in terms of punching up. Right? Humor and joy are really the same thing at a time like this. And when we think about Jewish traditions of humor amidst suffering, this is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I'll shout out that there's this, I don't want to say trope because that makes it sound negative. There's this meme, there's this history of Jewish humor and Jewish comedy. And I don't think we talk enough about how that is so thoroughly intermingled with our historic experiences of oppression. It's not just, oh, Jews happen to be drawn to like comedy, and oh, we have Seinfeld and we make the movie Airplane, and we could get even more recent, like Rachel Bloom and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Like there's so many reasons why groups of people, not just Jews alone, who are experiencing oppression generate satire, to use the most obvious one, but also just generate humor, generate fun, joy. Like, one thing I've noticed over the years is that people in sacred spaces rarely use the word fun. We use joy a lot. We never say fun. Fun is trivial. Fun is lowly. Joy is sacred. Joy is holy. I reject that. I think we should talk more about fun. And I think that actually relates to this whole thing that we sort of separate out the world into things that are quote unquote serious versus things that are fun. And in that is where like the joy feels like it shouldn't be present in the serious. It's like the joy is sometimes closer to fun. And so we don't want it to mess with our serious religious spaces. So I'm talking now back to Jewish humor and comedy and culture, which is separated out from the things that we call religion and seriousness, wrongly. But like, that's generated from this place of marginalization. There is not only a nice perk of being an oppressed people, like there's a need. Like groups of people that are marginalized need to generate that. There needs to be this humor because it allows for those groups to remind themselves of just how thoroughly ridiculous their oppressors are. And satire, humor, allows us to shine a light on, no, this is a laugh line. This is ridiculous. And so, ergo, lots of Jewish humor. But like, I think that points to the story you just identified of those two comedians or comics or jesters, it's sometimes translated in the Talmud, who are pointed out by Elijah the prophet in conversation with Rabbi Baroka as, oh, obviously they're going to be in the world to come. Like, those people are set. Because, yes, folks who bring joy to the world are doing sacred service. They're making the world more fun. And that is actually not just sort of, oh, we do that in our spare time when it's possible. That allows this place to be inhabitable. So finding fun in moments of outrageous terror, because finding fun is even more stigmatized than finding joy. Like, oh, you're having a ball while the world burns. Yeah, a little bit sometimes when we need that.
Yeah. As I think about the boring and violent stories that fascism tells, irreverence and fun are a really, really crucial part of being able to fight back. Because when I think about who has access to the idea of being serious, it's not people who are experiencing marginalization. And irreverence is actually part of what allows us to bear witness to and actually lay very naked how ridiculous these boring, violent stories are. You know, when I think about Miriam coming out and either having the tambourine that she thought to bring it, or that was something that she was like, this is a necessary survival tool for me, I think, what is the thing that I would bring? If I was leaving Mitzrayim, if I was leaving Egypt, what is the thing that I would bring that would allow me to spontaneously have a good time? And not just have a good time with myself, but have a good time with other people. Because I also, look, solo fun is great. Fun with other people, infinitely better. I strongly, strongly believe that. And I don't want to be a part of any society that says otherwise. And we do, in fact, actually live in a society that largely says otherwise. Right. But I think about, like, for me, I think it's like a pen and paper. I can have a real ton of fun with a pen and paper, especially. And then if I have pens and paper to give to other people, we can have a really good time. Right. But then there's also this other version of the story where you see Miriam and you say that Lex, tell me, what's the word? What's the word that it says is the tambourine that she has?
Oh, toph.
That Miriam comes out and that she has a toph, which can be translated as tambourine or timbral, but it can also just be a surface. And thinking about, is it actually a tambourine, or does she just grab whatever is around her to make something that allows her to drum, allows her to keep rhythm, allows her to sing in this way that has an instrument? You know, if the first question is, what would you bring out of Mitzrayim with you in order to have a good time? It's actually, when you have nothing at your disposal, what do you go to generate fun and joy and connection and, frankly, just celebration in any moment that you're in, even without use of physical materials? And those are the tools, actually, that we need to bring with us in a moment where it actually feels like there is so much grief that how could we possibly celebrate? Miriam says we should celebrate. The rabbis say we should celebrate. And we ourselves know that we need it in order to survive in times where everything is falling apart and the world is on fire.
Amen. Yeah, I think that's so important. This idea that maybe the beauty of that story, as some commentators have said, is that Miriam sensed that there'd be this moment of celebration. And so she packed in her very light bag as they rushed out of Egypt. She still prioritized having a timbrel. That's one way to read it. But the other is, yeah, she got across the sea. Oh, we gotta celebrate right now. I'm going to grab a rock and a stick, and that's going to be the toph. I don't know a ton about that word. I do know that it is typically translated drum. And if it's like English drum, yeah, anything that you drum on is a drum. So I'm with you on that. We're going to close on that note. Thank you to everyone for listening. We hope that you will check out the other episodes of Survival Guide for a Spiritual Wilderness if you haven't listened yet. There is a separate podcast feed for those, or you can go back to our Gemara episodes that we've released so far and listen to those. There will be one more, the 5th, that is the final episode in Jericho's amazing podcast. That Gemara will be out before too long. And so we hope that you'll continue along on this journey with us. Thanks to you, thanks to Miriam, thanks to Jericho Vincent. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.